The villagers called it cursed, a house where no one dared to linger past sundown. Blackwood Manor had stood for centuries, its darkened windows like eyes watching over the desolate landscape. They whispered of shadows that moved without light, of voices calling from empty rooms, and of those who entered but never returned. Madeline Cole didn't believe in ghost stories until the night she stepped through its creaking doors. What began as a search for answers would lead her into a labyrinth of terror, where the past refused to rest and the walls held secrets too dark to reveal. This was no ordinary haunting. Blackwood Manor was alive, and it had been waiting for her. Blackwood Manor stood at the edge of a forgotten village, cloaked in an eternal shroud of mist and mystery. Built in the late 18th century, the sprawling Gothic estate had been home to generations of the Blackwood family, each member carrying their share of the manor's dark secrets. Its towering spires, broken windows, and creeping ivy seemed to dare any outsider to approach. For decades, the house had stood abandoned, its history a subject of hushed whispers among the villagers. But tonight, the veil between the living and the dead would thin. Madeline Cole, a historian with a passion for the macabre, had come to Blackwood Manor to research its history. She had heard the rumors, ghostly sightings, disembodied whispers, and inexplicable shadows. Armed with her camera and notebooks, she approached the manor, her boots crunching the gravel underfoot. The air was heavy, with an unnatural stillness. The once grand iron gates creaked open on their own as Madeline approached, and a chill ran down her spine. She stepped inside the overgrown courtyard, where the wind seemed to carry faint whispers. The sound of her own heartbeat was deafening as she pushed open the heavy oak doors. The interior was just as she had imagined: dust-laden chandeliers, faded tapestries, and furniture shrouded in white cloth. The atmosphere was oppressive, as though the house itself was alive and watching her. Madeline set up her equipment in the grand foyer, its cracked marble floors reflecting the faint light from her lantern. As she took photographs, she noticed something peculiar: a strange, distorted figure in the background of one image. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no one else there. The silence was broken by a faint sound, like footsteps echoing through the halls. Gripping her flashlight, she followed the sound to the dining room. The long table was set for a feast, the silverware tarnished but arranged as though the meal had been served only yesterday. On the far end of the room, a chair creaked as though someone, or something, had just sat down. A cold draft swept through the room, and with it came a faint whisper: "Leave while you can." Madeline spun around, but no one was there. Her flashlight flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When the light returned, the table was empty. The once neatly arranged silverware was now scattered across the floor. Madeline ventured deeper into the house, her curiosity outweighing her fear. She climbed the grand staircase, its wooden steps groaning under her weight. At the top, she found herself in a corridor lined with portraits of the Blackwood family. The figures in the paintings seemed to follow her with their eyes, their expressions unnervingly lifelike. As she examined one portrait, a stern-looking man with piercing eyes, she felt a sudden coldness. The man's painted eyes seemed to shift, narrowing as though in anger. She blinked, certain it was a trick of the light. But when she turned to move on, a low growl echoed from the painting. "Why have you come here?" a deep, gravelly voice asked. Madeline froze, her blood running cold. She turned back to the portrait, only to see the man now smiling, a sinister, toothy grin that hadn't been there before. As the night wore on, the activity in the house grew more intense. Doors slammed shut of their own accord. Shadowy figures darted just out of sight, their movements accompanied by hushed whispers. In the library, books flew from the shelves, their pages flipping wildly as though searching for something. In the heart of the house, Madeline discovered a locked door. The key, rusty and cold, seemed to beckon her from a nearby desk. With trembling hands, she unlocked the door and descended into the basement. The air grew colder with every step, and the faint sound of sobbing echoed from below. The basement was a labyrinth of stone walls and flickering candles. At its center stood a large, circular mirror framed in black and silver. The glass was dark, reflecting nothing. As Madeline approached, the surface rippled like water, and a pale hand reached out. The figure that emerged was a woman in a tattered gown, her face obscured by a veil. "You should not have come," the ghostly figure whispered, her voice layered with sorrow and anger. The walls of the basement began to tremble, and shadows poured from the mirror, taking the form of the Blackwood family, each of them twisted and spectral. The ghostly woman revealed herself to be Eleanor Blackwood, the last matriarch of the family. She told Madeline the truth about the manor. It was cursed. Generations of Blackwoods had been consumed by their greed and cruelty, their souls bound to the house for eternity. The mirror in the basement was a gateway, a portal through which the Blackwoods had summoned something dark and ancient, a force they could not control. As Eleanor spoke, the shadows grew closer, their whispers rising to a deafening roar. "You must destroy the mirror," she urged. "It is the only way to free us." Madeline hesitated, but the sight of the tormented spirits gave her resolve. Using a nearby candlestick, she struck the mirror with all her strength. The glass shattered, releasing a blinding light that engulfed the room. The spirits screamed as they were pulled into the light, their forms dissolving into nothingness. When Madeline emerged from Blackwood Manor at dawn, the house was silent. The oppressive air had lifted, and the whispers were gone. The manor, though still crumbling and eerie, now felt empty. The curse had been broken. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. In her rearview mirror, the faint outline of a figure stood at the manor's window, watching her leave. It was Eleanor, her expression one of gratitude and sorrow. Madeline never returned to Blackwood Manor, but the villagers spoke of how the house seemed less foreboding. Yet, on quiet nights, some swore they could still hear faint whispers carried on the wind. As Madeline's car disappeared down the misty road, the dawn light began to creep across the manor's crumbling facade. For the first time in decades, the air around Blackwood Manor felt still, peaceful. Yet, as the sun broke through the clouds, a faint shadow flickered across one of the upstairs windows. Eleanor Blackwood watched in silence, her ghostly form fading into the morning light. Though the curse was broken, the house would never forget its history, and neither would she. Blackwood Manor had claimed its last victim, or so it seemed. For those brave enough to venture too close, the whispers still lingered, and the shadows still moved. The house may have been freed, but it was never truly empty. The question remained, who would be the next to cross its threshold?